how do you think? Now, there's two very defined ways of thinking when it comes to those who are entrepreneurs and generally those who are not. And that's the difference between a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. And so many people like to talk about this whole mindset training, mindset mentoring. There's a lot of people who have NLP certificates who like to think of themselves as being people who really help with mindset. When it comes to entrepreneurship, the two main areas we look at is either that fixed mindset, which says that failure is a limit. I'm not good at things, very black and white, very yes and no. My abilities are unchanging. I can't learn new tricks. And the old dog don't teach an old dog new tricks kind of idea. That's the fixed mindset. It does not help an entrepreneur at all compared to the growth mindset, where it says that failure is an opportunity. I can learn to do all the things I need to do. Challenges are helpful. Effort and attitude determine the abilities and the output. Feedback is not something which I'm really frustrated by, but it's something which is constructive and I absolutely have to have. That's the main difference in mindset between, I like to call it between the public servant mindset and the entrepreneur mindset. Very different approaches to life. So the entrepreneurial nature then that comes out of this very different kind of mindset is kind of where you look at opportunities. And that's a situation where new goods and services or access to new materials or new ways of doing things can be introduced, packaged up, and sold at a profit by an entrepreneur. So an entrepreneur is always looking for those opportunities. I know I've probably started up 17 different businesses myself. I've got about 6 of them still running. There's things I start up and then go, yeah, nah, I'll get bored of it, shut it down. Other things I go, yeah, I've got this successful now, but I don't want to work at it anymore. Let's sell it off. So I've had a couple of really good exits. Opportunity just never stops. Once you sort of get it, you don't really stop thinking about what the new opportunities are. I think we all have that friend in our lives who's very similar to this, who's very, very key at the idea of getting together new ideas all the time. Sorry, just lost my screen share there. Okay, we're back. So apart from opportunity too, the nature of the entrepreneur is a nature of action, where we're always creating new products or processes or some new way of doing things. Or it could be looking at something that we already had success with that we want to introduce into a new place, or something within our established or organizations that we want to try and go into a new market, or some way that we want to start a new organization up altogether. The entrepreneur is not very good at just sitting and resting on their laurels. The entrepreneur generally values change, new action, new initiative, just generally moving, keep on moving. It's a very common mindset we've got. We're also thinkers. We go through mental processes that look for opportunities and recognize them where other people don't, making decisions and being very decisive about those decisions and getting into action. And then also sitting back and going, you know what? I need to have a think about how that performed, about how that worked, about what I can do next with this, because this is that reflection and the ability to be able to sit back and very objectively reflect upon success or failure or the actions or the results or the outcomes is quite a unique part of the entrepreneur. The academic is a very similar kind of thing, though they should, and the scientists should look back at those things and say, well, the fact that my findings of 10 years ago have now been disproven, that's great because it's moved the science forward. Let's move and work in something that's very similar to that. So the entrepreneur, although they might have their problems come up, be solved, make a lot of money, and then suddenly be superseded, they tend to then just go, well, that's great. Now what can I do next? How we think as entrepreneurs is a little bit different to the way the rest of the working world does. The employee thinks a certain way. The entrepreneur tends to think a completely different way altogether. So structurally, we look at things that are obvious, the obvious superficial similarities between an idea we have and something else that's working, but then we also try to look for the structural similarities. So we've got an idea over on our left, and then there's this thing that's already there on the right. We'll look for the structural similarities between them, the very obvious things. But what we're really looking for is what makes that other thing work that could also make my thing work. So we don't tend to think just in superficial ways of going, this is a great idea. We go and look for the idea to become a full structure, to become a process. I like to think of it as sitting down and going on a date, and within 5 minutes, you've already mapped out the next 5 years of your relationship with that person. A little bit creepy, but in the real world of entrepreneurship, that's kind of how we think. We'll sit down and look at something and go, wow, within a very short period of time, we can assess a situation and imagine this thing could succeed. And we've got very good reasons for that, because very quickly, we're not just looking at superficially how cool the idea is, we're also looking at the structures that go into it are sound and solid and are reflected in other successful things. So that structural thinking is very good for us. Bricolage is a very famous part of being the entrepreneur, as basically, what can I build with what I already have access to? So rather than looking at and saying, I need to build an X-Wing fighter from Star Wars out of Lego, we would look at that same Lego kit and go, what can I build out of this? I know I can build an X-Wing starfighter, but that's, there's already instructions for that. Someone's already done that. But what we look at is go, well, here's a bunch of bricks and a bunch of little slabs that we can build out of. So what can we build? What's something new that we can build? Something different, or something that's perhaps got a different function to what the original spec would have. Bricolage then introduces us to an idea called effectuation. And this is one of the hardest things to teach someone if they don't have that entrepreneurial idea in their heads already. It's looking, rather than at one goal and being fixed on that one goal, it looks at a range of possible outcomes based on what you have to work with. Just like with Lego, you could have a great big bunch of 700 pieces of Lego and just go, what could I possibly build out of this with all these bricks? The fixed mentality and the opposite of effectuation, which is called causal thinking, is looking at it and going, well, this 400 bricks was meant to make the Eiffel Tower, so therefore that's what I'm going to make with it. Whereas the effectuated thinking, which is generally associated with entrepreneurs, looks at it, says, I've got 400 pieces, 700 pieces, whatever the pieces are. I know it would ideally make the Eiffel Tower, but I bet there's a whole bunch of other things I can make out of this as well. So let's have a look at what that might just be. So a little bit more about effectuated versus causal reasoning as being a very entrepreneurial way of thinking is that we look at a big bunch of ingredients in a kitchen. So we say, we've got all these ingredients: cottage cheese, salmon, steak, bread, garlic. We've got all kinds of different, root vegetables and bell peppers and zucchini and cabbage. We've got tons and tons of stuff. So what we would do is say, well, there's two different ways of thinking. The causal method of thinking would be take these ingredients and make a pizza. So if you make a pizza, you've generally got a good format of what a pizza is: a base, toppings, a sauce, melted cheese. It's a very stock standard thing. And you might be given the idea, say, well, you can do something different with that pizza. You can mix up the ingredients, pick a hero ingredient, but whatever you do, make it so that it's pizza. It has to be recognizably a pizza. You can rethink and reframe what a pizza is, but it still needs to be represented as a pizza. So if someone steps up and goes, what, and you say, ask them what this is, they will answer, oh, that's a pizza. But you can do whatever you want with the ingredients or the structure of it, as long as it looks like a pizza. That is causal thinking. That's the world's kind of thinking that generally goes with, okay, what I want you to do is make this specific outcome from these pieces of the puzzle. The effectuated thinking then is more like a mystery box. So you take all of those ingredients and I want you to make something new. Now, when I'm in my university class and we do this very same activity, what tends to happen is the people who make a pizza generally do a great job of planning out the making of a pizza. They will do all sorts of creative things to make it still very different to your standard Domino's pizza, but it's still a pizza at the end of the day. Whereas the people who make something new from those ingredients are not restrained on what they're going to put of that outcome. So they may have built a pizza. They certainly weren't told not to, but they are just as likely to build a juice or to build a burger or to build something in a taco, or they'll build something completely new dish based upon the ingredients they have to work with. Because they had absolutely no restrictions on what they do with those ingredients, they come up with some very cool, very interesting, and sometimes some disturbing combinations of food that could either be awesome or awful, depending on what your flavor profile tends to be. So the difference is causal thinking is, here's these things, make a pizza with it. The effectuated thinking is, here's all these ingredients, go sick, go wild, make whatever you want out of that. So a little bit more about the effectuated thinking and effectuation in general is that we look at it as
successful entrepreneurs discover.
Just before we go on to that, there's a bit of a video for you to watch.
How do successful entrepreneurs discover and capture major new opportunities? Professor Saras Sarasvati interviewed serial entrepreneurs who'd founded multiple high-growth ventures to find out what they had in common. A compelling picture emerged, the notion of effectuation. This recognizes that the entrepreneurial journey is more than just taking the most efficient path to an easily defined future. It's a process of exploration. And when you're exploring, objectives change, with new facts from the market and with new resources. The best entrepreneurs balance decisions between the resources at hand and affordable losses. Sarasvati, with Professor Stuart Reid and others, captured effectual entrepreneurship in a process diagram. It uses two feedback loops to help develop your value proposition. The loops allow you to test your value proposition on your customers and key partners, and to course correct your idea as you rerun the loop. The clarity that this process provides can help you move from thinking about it to actually doing it. A good start is to concentrate your meager resources and invest what you can afford to lose. The center of the diagram shows the process of exploring the idea. Each stage helps to define the proposition further. You, who you are and what you know, what you can do, your value proposition. People you know represent your first potential customer segments. Very early feedback can end a poor idea, but it can develop a good one. Begin to search for stakeholders, further bolstering your network. This track can lead you to acquiring greater means to pursue your idea. Your new insights and competencies develop your key partners, key resources, and key activities. Or it can result in a completely new set of goals, reshaping your value proposition in the light of this learning. The first loop is complete. As we go round the loop, we talk to customers, dump bad ideas, grow stakeholders, and iterate goals. Collating this information works in two ways. It refines your product and your knowledge of your customers. A network grown through referrals and recommendations greatly increases the reach of a new venture. Building such a network can greatly help a new business reach wider markets. Through this activity, you make your ideas real. And ultimately, a new firm, a new product, and even a new market is created. That's the process of effectuation.
So it's a very different way of thinking as opposed to setting a goal and saying, we must build this thing out of these resources. The next area is that we differ to most people in terms of entrepreneurship is cognitive adaptability, which is basically means we can change amidst changing circumstances. So the entrepreneurship tends to have a very dynamic view of life. They do not assume that anything stays the same. They tend to think that things are always changing, things rapidly change and develop, and they're always in motion. And so with that in mind, we have that adaptability to say, well, I too need to be dynamic if I'm able to operate in a dynamic world. We need to also be flexible, which sometimes means working in places you normally wouldn't work. I'm in a meeting room right now, which is a great place to do a webinar, but I'm just as easily able to do this at a cafe, in my home office at home. I've done it in my bedroom before when I've needed a quiet area and there was too much noise around in the house. And sometimes it could be even recording it on a plane. I've literally done that before and recorded the webinar in the plane as quietly as I could in business class. Thankfully, there was no one else there, but I had to make that time work because that's what an entrepreneur does. They work with the time they've got and the tools they've got to work with. We're also very self-regulating, and that means that we tend to take things on for ourselves and manage ourselves. We don't need someone to set our times and calendars for us. We tend to be able to do that very much ourselves. So we take the controls of our time, of our talents, and of our learning, and of our feedback, and the way that we operate in a way that is quite, we are our own virtual assistant, I suppose, or our own personal assistant, rather than having to call in third-party people to do that stuff for us. We're also very decisive in uncertain times, and that certainly is a very important thing to be able to do when those shifting sands are shifting faster than what most people can cope with. Whilst most people don't cope with anything more than moving house at one time, and they just go, moving house is a very stressful experience for them. Those of us who work in uncertain environments have grown, I guess we've grown some toughness or some thick skin around us, which means that tasks that require a lot of attention get that attention. But we also move things forward by making very fast, informed decisions. And sometimes that means having the right people around us. We also are very good at processing many inputs. We do not take just that one opinion. We look for many. We do not take one idea. We look at many different ideas. So we're always processing different opinions, different pieces of feedback, different inputs in order to learn that. There's nothing more dangerous than getting into some sort of multi-level marketing cult and only listening to the one guru who's got all the answers for how to make this thing work, when there are literally millions of other opportunities out there and around the world, which may be safer, easier, and much better return on investment than the thing that the guru was saying. So it tends to be a problem when we follow just one guru, instead of taking inputs from multiple different people who all have equally valid inputs to give to us. We also then, when we get started on what we're doing, use many different frameworks, not just one. We don't just look at one and go, I'm just going to use the business model canvas to build my business. No, we'll look at that. We'll look at the value canvas. We'll look at the the unique value proposition canvas, the value proposition canvas, the lean canvas. We'll look at all the different ways of looking at doing a business plan just to make sure that we're getting the right answers, rather than just putting our eggs in one basket and going, this is the only way I work, and therefore it's the only way I'm going to succeed. Because a single point of failure is probably one of the biggest mistakes that any entrepreneur can make, is having betting too much on one specific thing when there's many different options around. So learning then is the next major area where the mindset of the entrepreneur comes into play. It's where we have a very strong learning process, where we tend to have a plan, do, reflect cycle. We plan to do something, and that may take quite a while, but when we do it, then once we've done it, we tend to reflect upon that. And it's a very entrepreneurial way of thinking. Rather than just doing something and then going, oh, it failed, let's try something else. There's a definitive plan in place. And the way we think is to go, I am going to plan this out as much as I can, but I know that the proof is only in the pudding. So I have to do something at some point. And once I've done it, if I want to know if it's been successful, I then have to spend some time reflecting or reviewing that to make sure I don't make the same mistakes if it failed, or to learn what it was about what I did that was so successful, so I can put that into my further plans, whether that's a plan to grow the existing idea or to go into a new idea altogether. So reflecting and taking control of your own learning, likewise, is a massive priority for the entrepreneur. That they never truly rely on any one piece of information or one source of information or one idea to run their decision making. They like to take control of their own learning, and through that then increase their learning ability. And how do you do that? How do you literally come from not having learned anything since year 12 in high school, or maybe you did a university course, but that was still 25 years ago? How do you then get back into that space of learning or increase your ability to learn? And again, as you think, it's a very entrepreneurial thing to do, to build that learning muscle. And some of that's done by observing and comprehending the environment around you. So I'm talking about the business environment, your environment that you live in, really noticing what's going on. If you've got a business with several employees, actually observing what they're doing, how they're working, where the efficiencies are, where the losses are, where the problems may be. Literally observing the environment around you. Some people call that mindfulness. I just call it paying attention to what's going on around it, and making some comprehensions and judgments in your own brain about what is going on. And then the entrepreneurial structural thinking will kick in, where you suddenly go, well, I've now got a way to address that. So that's one way to learn, is to literally just sit there, watch, listen, and then learn about what's going on around you. Another way to do it is looking for all the connections. So for instance, when you meet someone at a networking event, see who else they speak to, so you can see the connections that are going on around the room. Connections can be simply working with your suppliers, so looking at the connections they've made and the others that they work with. looking for all the little threads that connect different people together, different technologies together, different suppliers together, different parts of your logistics network together, or whatever it is you happen to be doing. There are connections there. For me, I'm always looking for connections in software. So looking for what things connect with other pieces of software to help me to automate my time that little bit more, to make life that little bit less chaotic and a little bit more organized. We're also observing the strategies around us. That's watching how people do the things they do, not just what they do, how they do things in patterns over years. I could look when I was running a digital marketing agency. I'm just about to close that out. When I first started, I sat there and watched the work that others were doing in the space, and I thought, okay, I can see what you're doing there. I can see how you're working on that. I can reverse engineer that strategy, or not just reverse engineer it, but perhaps learn enough about it so that I can do something better, or introduce a new method of doing it, or somehow just doing something different to them that sort of gave a unique value proposition of sorts. So that observing the strategies that people do means taking some interest in what's going on around you, whether that's following them on LinkedIn, whether that's just looking at what shows up in terms of their clients, what you see in their social media posts, and seeing what they're up to gives you an idea of the kind of strategy that they might have. As an entrepreneur, because we are self-regulating, it's also kind of important that we notice how we feel about things. Notice how you react to good news, how you react to bad news, how you react to any news at all, how you react to changes and differences and dynamic and shifting sands. I'm not saying to make judgments about how you feel and what happens. I'm not asking you to get all kumbaya and start toasting marshmallows around a fire and navel gazing and talking about, I don't know, your relationship with your father and your mother. What I'm talking about is you noticing what happens when things happen. What happens to you? What's the first thing you do when you get off a bad phone call? Do you just start rubbing your temples and going, oh man, this day is just sucking? Or do you get off the phone and go, oh, okay, next? So it's not saying that any of those things are good or bad. It's just noticing your feelings. That helps you to then learn a lot about yourself, which then helps you then to learn what are the areas you think that are not really working very well for you. If there's certain things in your life that you think, you know what, that itself is not a great thing for me to be in. That's not a great way for me to think. That's not a great way for me to grow my business or to grow this organization that I'm trying to grow. I need to somehow address that. And so learning to learn about yourself is a process of learning how to succeed as an entrepreneur as well. So no one is an island unto themselves. And one of the great things that the entrepreneurial mindset comes with is a desire to work with others, not so much to work on your own. And that's through, getting to know role models. I have 3 or 4 men and women in the town I live in Darwin, that are very much the people who I look up to. I look up to them as business owners, as human beings, as successful parents, and as successful business owners. And I look at them not necessarily by shaking their hands and saying, hey, talk to me, give me advice as a role model. They wouldn't even know that they are my role models. Like I always say, my coaches don't even know they're my coaches, because I'm silently coached by them. I coach by everything I do and everything I see them do. I use them as an example of what I should do to be a better business owner and a better entrepreneur as well, and a better human being when it comes down to it. Not all these people are successful entrepreneurs that I look at as role models. Some of them are just brilliant people. So role models is a place to start, but you also need a moral support network. And I'm not talking about people to cry to necessarily, but it's people who you can safely say, I've had a rough day, can I vent? Or it could be someone to say, hey, you know what? I know this journey is hard and I just need you to listen to me, because it's not the easiest path. And I know you don't understand, but just hear me out. People who can literally be there. I know there's a fantastic initiative happening at the moment called the Men's Table, and I'll be joining the Men's Table sometime in October or November this year, which will be coming up in Darwin, which is that sort of moral support network. In some ways, in states and territories around Australia, there's men's circles like the Mankind Project. For women, there's a ton of women's business networks and women's mentoring networks that are set up to be able to provide this moral support network as well. If you're not really looking for anything that's necessarily connected to your gender, there's a ton of different business networks and moral support networks you can get into, masterminds, and other groups that are there to sort of help in business groups and closed networks. So safe places for you to get that support that you may need. The other one, of course, is the professional support network. Who's going to help you learn the things you need to learn in order for you to succeed at the thing you want to succeed at? And that's when you start looking for who are your little coaches for digital skills, for public speaking skills, for pitching skills, for financial skills, all those different things you will need. Now, a professional support network can contain your bookkeeper, can contain a legal expert, people who you literally pay for that information, but just as easily can include the people who give their time for free in order to be able to help you succeed. And they are very much part of your moral network as well, your moral support network, but mostly in a professional sense. They're the person who you can always ask about, I tried to do this in Facebook, it didn't work. Help me out there. And they're people you can turn to get those quick, easy answers to things. And they're always willing and able to help as well. The key thing about the entrepreneurial mindset is you're always learning. You're always adapting. You're always observing. And that's what makes you always moving forward.